There are lands where people are taught, from the day they learn to walk, how to bend without breaking. And then there are lands that teach something far more dangerous. They teach you how to stand. Zazzau was such a land. Long before maps tried to simplify it, long before foreign tongues renamed it. This place lived at the edge of survival. Trade routes crossed its soil like open veins. Wealth passed through its gates, and so did danger. Every caravan carried promise. Every horizon carried threat. In a land like this, peace was never assumed. It was earned, and often it was defended with blood. This is not a story about a woman who wanted power. It is a story about what happens when power comes looking for someone who refuses to look away. Imagine being born into a world where strength is expected of you, but permission is not. Where the future is already planned, but only if you agree to remain invisible. Imagine knowing, long before you have words for it, that safety has conditions attached. In Zazzau, no one was raised to be soft, but not everyone was allowed to be strong. The elders spoke of survival the way others speak of faith. You protected the roads, or the roads destroyed you. You guarded your people, or someone else claimed them. And if you hesitated, history moved on without you. Some children grow up hearing lullabies. Others grow up hearing warnings. This story begins in that space between warning and destiny. In the quiet, before a life decides whether it will obey the shape it has been given, or break it. We will not begin with a name just yet. Names come later, after choices are made. We will begin instead with a question that echoes across generations. What does a person owe to their people when silence would be easier? What does it cost to stand upright in a world that prefers you bowed? This is not a tale of conquest for glory. It is not a legend polished to make us comfortable. It is the memory of a woman shaped by a land that did not forgive weakness, and a time that did not expect her to lead. And yet, lead she did. If you stay until the end of this story, you will not just learn about battles and walls, or crowns and titles. You will understand something far older and far heavier. You will understand why, even today, long after the dust has settled, some names refuse to lie down. This is the story of a life that chose to stand when standing carried a price. And once you hear it, you may find yourself standing a little straighter too. Zazzau did not become strong by accident. It stood where movement could not be avoided. North to south, east to west, people passed through its lands carrying salt, kola nuts, leather, cloth, and stories from worlds far away, where goods traveled, wealth followed, and where wealth gathered. Danger never stayed far behind. Every road was an opportunity. Every road was a risk. To live in Zazzau was to understand that survival depended on vigilance. A ruler who failed to protect the roads did not simply lose power. They lost relevance. And a people who could not defend passage would soon find themselves pushed aside by those who could. This land did not raise dreamers. It raised watchers. Children learned early that the horizon mattered. Dust clouds in the distance could mean trade, or they could mean war. And the difference was not always clear until it was too late. Zazzau taught its people that peace was temporary, unless guarded. That prosperity required strength, that hesitation invited loss. It was into this environment that Queen Aminatu Mohamud was shaped, long before she ever held authority, long before anyone imagined her name would be remembered beyond her lifetime. She did not inherit gentleness from her land. She inherited awareness. Zazzau demanded presence. You could not rule from behind walls alone. You could not protect people you refused to see. Leadership here was not ceremonial. It was physical. It walked the roads. It listened to merchants. It counted losses and measured threats. This land had no patience for leaders who spoke softly but acted slowly. The rhythms of Zazzau were harsh, but they were honest. If you failed, the consequences arrived quickly. If you succeeded, the reward was stability, not praise. From this soil grew a mindset that would later define Amina's reign. Security was not cruelty, and strength was not excess. They were obligations. Zazzau also carried memory. The memory of raids endured. The memory of neighbors who had grown too bold. The memory of rulers who had waited too long to act. These memories lived in stories told at night, in warnings passed from elders to the young. They were not meant to inspire fear, but preparedness. For Amina, this meant one thing. Leadership was never abstract. It was tied to roads, walls, people, and the quiet promise that tomorrow could be safer than today if someone was willing to bear the weight of making it so. Zazzau did not ask whether a leader was male or female. It asked only one question: can you hold what we have against those who would take it? Everything that followed in Amina's life began with that question, planted by the land itself. Before she ever chose her path, Zazzau had already begun shaping the kind of person who would be forced to answer it. Power surrounded Amina from the moment she could understand words. She was born into the royal household of Zazzau, where decisions were not debated for entertainment, but made because lives depended on them. Her father ruled a kingdom that survived by staying alert. Her mother had once held authority herself, guiding the state through moments when hesitation would have been fatal. This mattered because Amina did not grow up imagining leadership as something distant or ceremonial. She watched it up close. She saw the weight behind every command. She learned early that a crown was not decoration. It was responsibility made visible. Yet even in that household, the future had boundaries. As the eldest daughter, Amina carried expectation, but not permission. She was taught to observe, to learn, to understand the machinery of power, but not necessarily to step inside it. The unspoken rule was, clear knowledge was acceptable. Authority would belong elsewhere. Suitors arrived long before affection could. They came bearing gifts, tribute, promises of alliance. These offers were not insults. They were practical. Marriage, after all, was the approved path for a woman of her status. Influence without exposure. Power without accountability. It was a safe road, and Amina understood exactly where it led. To accept that path would mean living through others, advising quietly, being respected, but never decisive, present, but never central. She did not reject these expectations loudly. She did not declare rebellion. She simply did not step forward when the moment came to be placed behind someone else. Instead, she listened more closely, watched more carefully, learned the patterns of men who believed they would never be challenged. From her mother, she absorbed something more subtle than instruction. She learned that leadership was not about who was allowed to speak, but who was prepared to act when silence failed. From her father, she learned that hesitation carried consequences no apology could erase. Growing up in power did not make Amina reckless. It made her precise. She understood the cost of visibility. She understood that stepping beyond expectation would invite scrutiny, resistance, and isolation. But she also understood something deeper. Remaining within expectation would erase her entirely. This was not a dramatic realization. It unfolded slowly. Over years of listening to conversations she was not meant to lead, watching decisions she knew she could make better. Amina did not yet claim authority, but she began to carry it, and in a household where everyone believed they knew her future. She quietly prepared for a different one. There comes a moment in certain lives when ordinary rules no longer apply. For Amina, that moment arrived not with a crown, but with responsibility. She was given real authority early, charged with oversight that affected land, people, and safety. This was no symbolic title meant to keep her occupied. It was work that carried consequences. Mistakes would be counted, failures would be remembered, and unlike others, Amina understood something clearly. From the start, she would not be allowed to fail quietly. Every decision she made was watched more closely, every misstep anticipated, not because she was inexperienced, but because she was visible in a way others were not. In council gatherings, silence followed her words, not the respectful silence of agreement, but the measured quiet of judgment. Men waited, not to be convinced, but to see whether she would stumble. Amina learned to read these rooms without flinching. She recognized that her presence alone unsettled expectations, that what was being tested was not her judgment, but the idea that someone like her could possess it at all. This was the moment when life stopped offering the comfort of being average. For others, an error might be corrected and forgotten. For her, it would be proof. Proof that women should not be trusted with weight. Proof that boundaries existed for a reason. So Amina adjusted. She prepared more thoroughly than required, learned faster than expected. She trained with the cavalry not for spectacle, but for understanding. She needed to know how decisions felt on the ground, not just how they sounded in chambers. She did not seek admiration. She sought competence so complete, it left no space for doubt. This was not ambition in the shallow sense. It was survival under observation. Amina realized that she could never simply be good enough. She had to be unmistakable. And in accepting that truth, something hardened within her. Not bitterness, clarity. From that point on, there was no return to an ordinary life, no quiet path back to expectation. Amina had crossed into a different category, one where every action would carry meaning beyond itself. She did not ask for this role, but she accepted it, and once accepted, she refused to shrink beneath it. At some point, Amina faced the choice that defines every leader. Not whether to act, but how much she was willing to carry for the sake of others. Zazzau could not survive on goodwill alone. Its wealth depended on open roads, and open roads invited predators. Neighboring powers tested borders. Raiders watched for hesitation. Merchants whispered of safer paths elsewhere. Amina understood the quiet threat beneath these movements. If trade slowed, hunger followed. If borders weakened, the vulnerable paid first. Doing nothing was not neutrality. It was abandonment. The easy path would have been restraint. Fewer campaigns, fewer enemies, less risk to her reputation. But restraint carried its own cost one paid slowly, invisibly, by people who would never sit in council chambers. So Amina chose action, not for glory, not for expansion as spectacle, but to establish something far more difficult: predictability. When Zazzau moved, it moved with purpose. When it warned, it followed through. Her campaigns were deliberate. She targeted routes that mattered. She demanded tribute not to humiliate, but to secure peace. Those who complied traded safely. Those who tested her resolve learned the limits of tolerance. This was not a clean morality. Amina knew this. War never is. But she also knew that leadership sometimes requires choosing the burden that harms least, even when it stains the hands of the chooser. She carried that stain herself, so others could sleep without fear of what dawn might bring. Critics would later call her severe. They would speak of conquest as cruelty. They would overlook the alternative, the slow erosion of a kingdom left undefended. Amina never claimed her choices were gentle, only necessary. Each decision tightened the distance between her and solitude. Power isolates those who wield it honestly, but she accepted that too, because the measure of her rule was not how she was remembered by rivals, but whether her people endured. And endured they did. Standing at the edge of these decisions, Amina did not ask whether history would forgive her. She asked only whether tomorrow would arrive with fewer graves. That question guided her more surely than praise ever could. Amina did not lead from behind. She was present in ways that could not be imitated or faked. When her armies moved, she moved with them. When they rested, she rested among them. She ate the same food, endured the same dust, and faced the same danger. This mattered more than any speech ever could. Soldiers did not follow Amina because she held a title. They followed her because she shared risk. In moments when fear spread faster than orders, her presence steadied them. She did not demand courage. She modeled it. On the battlefield, Amina was deliberate. She did not rush into chaos, nor did she retreat at the first sign of resistance. She watched, she waited, and when she acted, it was with purpose that left little room for doubt. Her enemies noticed this restraint. They expected fury. They prepared for recklessness. Instead, they faced a leader who measured patience as carefully as strength. Fear does not always come from violence. Sometimes it comes from certainty. Amina's certainty unsettled those who opposed her. They could not provoke her into mistakes. They could not rely on her underestimating them. She treated conflict as a responsibility, not a release. Within her ranks, discipline grew from trust. Soldiers knew she would not waste lives for pride. They knew she would not abandon them for safety. That knowledge bound them together more tightly than fear ever could. Leadership, in Amina's hands, was not loud. It was consistent. As her influence expanded, so did her understanding of what power required. Victory was temporary. Stability was the true measure. And stability demanded something beyond conquest. It demanded permanence. After each campaign, Amina ordered the construction of walls. Not monuments, but defenses. Earth and labor shaped into boundaries that promised protection long after the army moved on. These walls became known as Ganuar Amina. They were practical, not symbolic. They marked spaces where people could settle, trade, and raise families without constant fear. What began as military necessity became the foundation for cities. Through these acts, Amina revealed the deeper purpose behind her leadership. She was not conquering to dominate. She was organizing space so life could continue. Power that moves on without leaving shelter behind is not leadership. It is disturbance. Amina refused to be a passing force. She built things meant to outlast her presence. And in doing so, she transformed conquest into continuity. As Queen Amina's name spread beyond Zazzau, it began to change. Not in meaning, but in tone. To her people, it became reassurance. To merchants, it became a promise that roads would remain open. To rivals, it became a calculation. They no longer asked whether Zazzau would respond, only how quickly. Yet, with recognition, came distortion. Stories grew sharper at the edges. Some praised her discipline. Others whispered that no woman could rule so firmly without being unnatural. Legends replaced details. Curiosity turned into suspicion. This was not new. It is what history often does to women who refuse to soften themselves for comfort. Amina did not answer these stories. She had no need to. Her work stood where rumors could not. Walls still held, Markets still functioned. Children still grew up behind defenses that had her name carved into memory, not stone. When she died, far from the heart of Zazzau, there was no spectacle, no final speech meant for posterity. She left this world as she had lived in it, moving, responsible, unfinished. After her passing, the kingdom slowly drew inward. Expansion paused. Borders stabilized. Life continued. But something unmistakable had ended. Not a dynasty. A standard. People remembered that there had once been a ruler who did not ask whether power suited her. She simply carried it. They remembered a woman who chose burden over approval, permanence over praise. In time, her story became part of something larger than dates or campaigns. It became a reminder that African history did not begin with chains, but with structure. That leadership once looked like accountability. That Black history holds figures who built, protected, and endured without asking permission to be remembered. For some, her story became history legends, told late at night. For others, it became history for sleep, steady and grounding. A voice reminding them that strength once stood where they stand now. For those seeking African history, rooted in dignity, her life offered proof. For those searching for historical facts beneath myth, her walls still speak. And for anyone who carries the weight of Black history in their bones, Amina remains a quiet answer to a loud lie. That lie says we were never whole. Her life says otherwise. Amina of Zazzau does not ask to be admired. She asks only to be remembered accurately. And as long as her name is spoken with care, she remains what she always was. A woman who stood so others could live upright after her. When the dust finally settled, Queen Amina did not leave behind a throne that demanded worship. She left behind a posture. Long after her armies stopped marching, long after borders stopped shifting, people remembered how she had stood when standing was costly. They remembered that leadership, in its truest form, is not comfort, but responsibility, carried in full view. History tried to turn her into a riddle. Some stories exaggerated her solitude. Others sharpened her image into something unnatural, as though strength in a woman required explanation. But beneath every distortion remained the same foundation: the walls, the roads, the order that allowed life to continue. Those things do not lie. Amina did not rule forever. No one does. But while she lived, she proved that authority does not ask permission from tradition when survival is at stake. She showed that dignity is not granted by approval, but earned through action that protects others. For those who came after her, especially those scattered far from ancestral lands, her memory became more than a lesson. It became a reassurance, a reminder that before captivity, before erasure, there were African leaders who built, defended, and governed with clarity. That is why her story still moves quietly through generations. It appears in elders' voices and late-night reflections. In the steady rhythm of history, legends passed down, not for spectacle, but for grounding. In the calm assurance of history for sleep, where knowing where you come from makes rest easier. In the deep current of African history that refuses to be reduced to suffering alone. In the solid presence of historical facts that remain even when myths fall away. And in the living weight of Black history, carried not as burden, but as inheritance. Queen Amina does not stand as an exception meant to impress. She stands as evidence. Evidence that leadership once looked like accountability, that power once meant protection, that a woman could shape the fate of a people without asking history to make room for her. As long as her name is spoken with care, her story remains intact, not as conquest, not as legend alone, but as a reminder that standing upright has always been part of who we are.